prepare to mature yourself to a place where you don't need to take every single piece of work you do and put it up for public consumption as a celebration of your art, but practice and use your art form to practice in a way that when you really do have something you want to share, it is strategically put in front of an audience instead of just taking every little thing you crap out and put it on YouTube or Vimeo for everybody to see.
This episode is brought to you by Bulletproof Script Coverage, where screenwriters go to get their scripts read by top Hollywood professionals. Learn more at covermyscreenplay.com. Welcome to the show, John Bucher, brother. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Hey, it's my pleasure. I've been a fan of what you've done here for a long time, and it's a real honor to be on the show.
Oh, thank you so much, man. I appreciate it. So before we get into it, man, how did you get into this ridiculous business we call the film industry?
Well, it's sort of a funny story, actually. I was involved in music in high school, and I thought music is what I wanted to do with my life. And I went to college, and I decided, if I'm going to go into music, I should learn how to be an engineer, somebody who sits behind these big production boards. And so I looked at my college catalog, and it said they had something called the recording arts. And I said, excellent, that sounds great. So I signed up for the first class, and the first day of classes, they pushed a TV camera out onto the floor. And I realized I had actually signed up for this coursework in film and television. Recording arts meant visual recording, not music. And I was too embarrassed to say anything. So I just went, through the first courses, and I found out that I loved this medium. So I began making short films and writing screenplays and creating work. And I began to realize that this is actually something people do as a career. And I knew I wanted to tell stories the rest of my life. And so this medium sort of came and found me.
Basically. And I'm assuming you've gone through a couple of landmines and trenches while working in the business. You've taken some shrapnel along the way?
My God, man. I could tell you stories all day long. The first time I arrived in Hollywood, the very first job I got here was working on a reality show called Flavor of Love.
Oh my God. Okay. Do you stop right there?
Yes.
I saw the 3 seasons.
Okay. You're
I was a fan of Flavor of Love. I'm sorry, everyone listening, do not think any less of me. Now, this was a darker time in my life where I was not educating myself as much as I should have been, and I was vegging out, and I was obsessed with Flavor of Love and New York and what was that, the Bret Michaels thing I saw right afterwards. Yeah.
Rock of Love. Afterwards. I worked on all those shows, man. I love New York, Rock of Love. I worked on all those shows. I worked as a production assistant just at the lowest levels. And man, I could tell you stories, just war stories from those shows. But I got to tell you, it also gave me a taste for what working in this business on a daily grind is like. And I sort of began to love this idea of just being on sets every day and the way that, the producers of the show were crafting something that was tremendously entertaining. Now, like you, I'm a bit embarrassed about it. When I was working on it, I wouldn't even tell my mother what show I was working on because I didn't want her to tune in and watch it and be so disappointed in me.
You mean to tell me that show wasn't real?
Oh, my God. Some of the finest writers in Hollywood crafted the storylines that you saw on TV.
That is remarkable. No, and there's no, I've done a little bit of reality work, but mostly in post. I actually was a PA on some Nickelodeon reality shows back in the day when I first started out. But there's nothing like being on a reality show to kind of, you want to talk about getting shrapnel. Right. And you want to talk about hardening that shell around that skin. Man, working in reality is like, oosh, it's rough. Yeah. It's a rough scenario for everybody involved, from the PA to all the way to the top, because a lot of times you're not working with professional talent.
Right.
And all the egos get a little bit out of control sometimes.
It's a hustle for everybody. The talent, the crew, everybody is on a hustle, and everybody is just trying to make this something that will be successful so everybody makes more money and gets more work. It's sort of an environment completely crafted around fear in many ways that, this is going to be a big embarrassment or it's going to be a career killer for a lot of people rather than a career maker.
Yeah, it's, there are reality shows that are fantastic. I mean, that are Emmy Award winning and things like that. But like, I even did one of my short runs in post. I did a color grading on a bridal dress show. Like, you wear the dress or you sell the dress or you make the dress. I lasted 3 or 4 episodes before I just can't. This is the most unprofessional situation I've ever been in. And I work in independent film. I would 15 different camera setups, different color spaces, different I'm like, do you guys even have you even taken a YouTube course on how to shoot stuff? I just couldn't. It's insane. So, all right. So definitely
did you see that old documentary, American movie about the guy?
Fantastic movie.
Film?
Oh, it's a fantastic.
Love that. Love that.
Fantastic.
And it probably is the closest thing you'll ever see to how reality shows get made. Mm-hmm. It's 27 different camera setups with every color balance and f-stop known to man.
No one
people coming in and out of the project. It is a very, very close representation of what making a reality show is like.
And what was it called? American
Movie. Yeah.
American Movie, not American Movie, American Movie. Anyone who's listening, go and rent American Movie. It is arguably one of the most stellar documentaries on the independent filmmaking process ever. And it's just so entertaining to watch. Brutal. It's also brutal to watch.
It is.
It's like watching Ed Wood. Remember when you saw Ed Wood for the first time, the Tim Burton's Ed Wood movie? You're crying. You're just like, if you're a director, you're like, but just give him to mud. Let him make his movie.
Well, and would you also not say that, after watching that, there's no excuse for me not to go make my film after watching what this guy goes through to make his? This guy's got it way worse off than any situation I've ever been in. If he can do it, anybody should do it.
I mean, we could go down this road of conversations in regards to Ed Wood and how fantastic his films were in the way that he made them. But that movie, the Tim Burton movie, you sit there going, oh my, getting a whole bunch of dentists together and literally putting together plastic plates to make saucers, and he had no understanding of any sort of aesthetic or quality. Right. But man, did he made up with it with passion.
Yes,
passion. Another movie everyone should go watch: Ed Wood, starring Johnny Depp as the infamous Ed Wood. So let's get into it. So I know because I feel that we can talk about this for a while. We're going to have a good chat in this episode. I have a feeling. So you are a mythologist. If I may quote your website. Yeah, mythologist. So what is a mythologist?
Well, first of all, it's someone who goes to graduate school to study mythology, somebody who, devotes their time, effort, education, finances, to the study of mythology. And I later this year am completing my PhD in mythology. And the reason I became interested in that was I wanted to learn about the stories behind the stories. What are these stories, that keep appearing in different places around the globe throughout history? Why, for example, do we keep telling the story of Cinderella in a million different cultures throughout history over and over and over again? Mm-hmm. Why do we keep telling the story of Hercules? We've got basically every movie with The Rock or Vin Diesel is another version of the Hercules story. Mm-hmm. So why do we keep telling these stories over and over again? I wanted to learn about that. So I went and spent several years of my life, taking these classes and reading these books and listening to the greatest mythologists in the world talk about why human beings keep being drawn to these same narratives over and over again. And of course, we end up studying a lot of the what many would say was the greatest mythologist, Joseph Campbell, who had such an influence on George Lucas in the creation of the original Star Wars, which, being a Star Wars fan, I was familiar with Joseph Campbell. I knew that Star Wars was based on this mythological idea of the hero's journey, and I wanted to know more about that. And I think, in the last few years, there have been a lot of people who have, anytime somebody finds value in something or really likes something, there's like a whole group of people that rise up that want to tear that down and want to talk about why that's not, a good thing or a helpful thing.
Right.
And you know what? I really have issue with people that make their whole careers or make their whole online presence about trying to tear down someone else's work. I feel like the value to the hero's journey is it's tremendous, and it doesn't mean that every story that's ever hit the screen needs to be about the hero's journey. As a matter of fact, Joseph Campbell was a guy he was not prescriptive in what he was saying. He didn't say, in order to tell a good story, you need to have these elements. He was being descriptive of the stories he had saw throughout the centuries and throughout history of what had worked well and what had risen up in storytelling, in all these different cultures throughout history. So it wasn't even meant to be a prescriptive thing. It's not trying to make storytelling formulaic. What it really is getting to the base psychology of how human beings solve problems and the way that we put that in narrative form.
Yeah, obviously I'm wearing a Lucasfilm t-shirt, and you see a giant life-size Yoda in the background. So you know that I'm also a Star Wars fan, and I'm also very familiar with Joseph Campbell's work. Anyone who's a screenwriter should at least read The Hero's Journey, or at least The Writer's Journey by Chris Vogler.
Yes.
That is amazing as well. It is remarkable how we continue to tell the same stories again and again. And I think it was the first time I ever really understood that we were telling the same stories again and again is when I read Sid Field's book.
Yeah.
That was the first time I was like, I think maybe first year out of college or out of high school, excuse me. And I read it, I was like, wait a minute. You mean all movies are like, and then you start going back in your head of like, this movie did it too, and this movie did it too, and this movie did it too. Yeah. There is a structure that goes all the way back to the Greeks, and obviously farther back, but the Greeks really took it and ran with it. Yeah. There is a structure in poetics, basically. It's
Aristotle's Poetics, and he was the first one who said that a story should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we get our 3-act structure from that. Now, what's interesting there is a lot of people say, well, that's just common sense or whatever. But that was not how stories were being told before then. Really, they were being told in 2-act structures. And if you go see a play today, most plays still have 2 acts. So the idea of telling a story in 3-act structure was pretty revolutionary, because it used to be that a single actor would be on the stage with a comedy mask or a tragedy mask. Mm-hmm. And you would basically have the actor, portraying this story all themselves. And then we had a Greek tragedian who writes this idea of adding a second actor to the mix, and having 2 actors, one that wears the comedy mask and one that wears the tragedy mask. And then we have another Greek tragedian that adds this idea of the Greek chorus, who stand up behind the actors and they sing what's happening sort of in the backstory. All these developments allowed us to start being able to tell more and more complex stories. We could have never gotten to something like the Avengers, which is this long, epic story that without advancing incrementally into how stories are told in more and more complex ways. The Avengers is tremendously complex. And sometimes we like to say, well, yeah, that's the way a story should be told. But it took processes for us to get there in order to have these multi-hour stories that audiences could follow. So I think Aristotle was really onto something. Let me just also say, and I'd be interested to know, how you feel about this. You're someone who lives in this world. I feel like, oftentimes it's become sort of in vogue to sort of trash any ideas about structure in modern storytelling. I would say this, though. It's not about formula, but it is about form. Writers are the only group of artists that really trash the idea of structure sometimes. You never have musicians that come in and say, I'm going to write a song and I'm going to create a new chord that no one's ever heard before. I'm going to not use the chords in notes. You never have an artist that comes in and tries to create new colors that no one's ever seen before. You never have an architect that says, I'm going to design a house with no floor and no ceiling and no windows and no walls. But it doesn't mean that every painting looks alike. It doesn't mean that every song sounds alike or that every house looks alike. I think we have to understand that structure is necessary for us to be able to build something that resonates with an audience. But it doesn't mean it's the only form of storytelling out there. Mm-hmm. There are stories that just explore a character, who a character is, and trying to get down deep into that. But I think sometimes we like to just throw paint up on the wall in whatever sticks. We say, well, that's what I meant to do. I'm not going to be bound by these things. And sometimes I think it's laziness more so than anything else. But I'd be curious to know what your take is on that.
I have strong feelings about this because because writers in general or screenwriters specifically, anybody. It's not like I listen to John Williams' score and I say, oh, I can go do that because I listened to it.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing for filmmakers and screenwriters. Like, oh, I watch movies. Oh, I read a screenplay. I guess I can go do that. There's not. It's like the level of entry or the barrier to entry is so low for screenwriters, meaning that you need a laptop, final draft, and an idea, and some basic understanding on how to structure or format a screenplay, and you're automatically a screenwriter. And it's not that. And when I see filmmakers or screenwriters start saying, structure, or that save the cat thing, or all this kind of stuff is not good, I look at it differently in the sense that I feel that a lot of that's insecurity. Because it's insecurity and it's ego in their own mind, because they're like, I can do it better. I don't need structure. I'm like, you do need, man. You need a blueprint to build a house, man. And not every house looks the same.
That's right.
It's the bottom line. You just need a blueprint. And that blueprint can change dramatically. You could have 5 doors in the front of the house if you want to, and the bathroom could be on the roof. It's fine if you want to do that, but you still need to have the rules of the game in order to play. And I think structure allows you to do that. When I write, I love structure dramatically because it's like mile markers for me on where I can like put things and I can move those mile markers when I want to, but they're there, and they just kind of like, okay, here I can hang my hat on this, I can hang my hat onto that, and so on. And I think it's so important for screenwriters to understand that structure is not an enemy. It's actually a friend of yours. And when you look at these stories like Joseph Campbell's, work and the hero's journey, like, look, we all know, anyone listening to this should know the hero's journey. The basic, it has been beaten and beaten and beaten to death ever since Joseph Campbell came up, or at least presented it to the world. It had already been there. He just packaged it and presented it to the world. We all know a variation of the hero's journey.
Yeah.
Is the hero's journey for every single story? I don't think so. Try to throw the hero's journey on a detective story. It's going to be really tough.
That's right.
It's a really tough scenario. Yeah. So,
and what you're saying there is so important because Joseph Campbell wrote this book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, in 1949, right? Long time ago. It was meant to describe these things that he saw. I am someone who believes right now we could do well to take an interest in some of the other things that Joseph Campbell wrote about. And one of the things he wrote about is alchemy. And it's a really interesting part of the study of mythology to look at alchemy. And I'm working on some theories right now around storytelling alchemy. because alchemy was this practice basically of turning lead into gold. It was this process, that these magicians and chemists and religious people,
wizards,
they would try and take these elements and combine them in order to make gold. So I've sort of got this theory that I'm working on that I'm calling storytelling alchemy. And what it is basically taking narrative elements and combining them in order to create something different. The best example that I could make is if you took a glass vase and you filled it full of everything we know about story, everything we know about developing characters and about 3-act structure and 5-act structure for television and every aspect of symbolism and everything we know about story, if you put it in a glass vase and then dropped it on the ground and it shattered into a million pieces. And let's say we took all those different pieces and we created a mosaic on the wall of something beautiful, a new art form. That, I think, is what we're seeing right now with a lot of short form video, with a lot of long form storytelling through these streaming services. We're seeing people take value in all these elements from character. Like people have studied in depth how characters should develop and psychology of characters. And people are taking elements of 3-act structure, but they want to, put a twist on it and make it sort of episodic in nature. And we're taking all these elements and we're creating a new mosaic of something that's beautiful that people enjoy, but it still has all these elements that we know to be true about storytelling. And so I think it's a form of alchemy where maybe all we're doing is we're taking elements that we know about what makes a character work, and we're combining that with audience agency and creating something like Bandersnatch, which was the Black Mirror, spin-off movie that allowed the audience to make decisions and have agency. And I think, something like that, how do you tell a 3-act story in something where the audience has agency, which is, an experimental thing that's going on with storytelling? Well, we still can take these narrative shards that we pick up off the broken glass and create a new mosaic. And it's still got the elements. They just may not be in the same order that we've experienced them before.
I think that you bring up a very good point. I mean, you wrote a book, obviously, called The Masters of the Cinematic Universe, which talks about transmedia. And I do think that there is a lot of opportunity for writers, because a lot of writers listening right now, a lot of screenwriters are all stuck in the same old school way of telling stories. And I don't say that in a derogatory way, but like just a standard, legacy, meaning screenwriting, writing a novel, writing a book, those kind of storytelling vehicles, television and so on. But now there is so many multiple ways that you can write and tell stories in all of these other platforms. Before we get into that, though, can you tell me, in your definition, what is transmedia? Because it is a word that is thrown around. It was kind of like, what was that back in the day? What was that word? Like with CD-ROMs and...
multimedia?
Multimedia, yes. That was like multimedia player and multimedia. Like it was one of these these token words that like, thank God it's gone. But it was like one of these things, like it's a multimedia thing. And like transmedia has turned it into something like that. So can you explain exactly what transmedia is?
Absolutely. And transmedia, you're right. It's become a buzzword, and it's sort of grown to a point where people just don't even really know what it is. The original idea behind transmedia is that you could create a story that could move between mediums and platforms. Now, a great example of this is what we've seen with the stories of, say, Spider-Man or the Avengers or Batman. We started with these stories being told through the medium of comic books, right? Then we saw these stories being told through video games and through movies and through television shows. And basically, these same stories are able to move between mediums. And that's really what transmedia storytelling is creating a story that's able to be expressed regardless of what medium it is. It's sort of something that came out of the explosion of technology that allowed us to start telling stories in a lot of different ways. And somebody would come up with a really good idea for a story. They would go in and pitch it, and an executive might say, that's a really good story. Our film slate is really full right now, but maybe we could tell that through the medium of television, or maybe we should send that story over to our video game division. Mm-hmm. And so people began trying to create stories that would be powerful and be impactful regardless of the medium that they were expressed in. Now, on one hand, this is great because we have more ways to tell and express a story. On the other hand, people begin to ignore the fact that every particular medium actually has rules and has form that helps that story work best. Mm-hmm. So it's not possible really just to take a story that would be a feature film and just plug it in as a television show. Mm-hmm. You've got to recraft it. You've got to recraft it for the medium in a way that makes it work. Now, television even has really changed dramatically since we've had all these streaming services come into play. Now people binge watch shows. So it's not about trying to end a story every week in a place that brings the audience back to see it the next week, because people can binge the show and just watch the next episode right away. So we have to look at these various mediums and try and understand how we express any good story idea through the form of that medium. And that's really what the book Master of the Cinematic Universe is about, is trying to look at those forms and say, okay, if you have a good story idea, how are you going to then pour it into the appropriate shape, the appropriately shaped glass in order for the audience to want to drink it?
Yeah, it's kind of like video game movies. Yes. Like I'm sure there's one or two that are good, but the majority of them are horrendous. Because they're trying to take the medium from a video game and plop it into a narrative feature film, and it's just very difficult because it's just different. The storytelling in a video game is massive and in scope, and you can go 1,000 different directions, and to try to jam that all into an hour and a half, it's difficult. It's extremely difficult. I mean, can you recommend? Do you remember a video game movie that was good?
Maybe. There was something I liked about the most recent Tomb Raider. There was some things I liked about that.
Yeah.
It's not a great movie.
No.
But I tell you, I've had more bad experiences than good. I really, saw the trailer a year or so ago for Assassin's Creed, and I thought, oh man,
it looks so good. No.
I know. And the movie was one of the worst I've seen on the screen.
No.
And how do you get Michael Fassbender,
he looked great. He looked.
I know.
It looked fantastic. It was horrible. So this brings us into something else, and I know we're walking on landmines on this next conversation. I think you know where I'm going with this. So you've worked with Vertigo Comics,
mm-hmm.
All right. Which for everyone listening, Vertigo Comics is kind of, it's part of the DC universe. Right. And I've always said that Vertigo is a wonderful. I mean, what they do with their storytelling is fantastic. They made movies were based on their books like Watchmen and V for Vendetta, and a handful of other ones as well that are really, really good. And that side of the DC universe, I have utmost respect for. But there's another side of the DC universe that is not the Chris Nolan Batman.
Right.
Or the Tim Burton Batman, or any standalone Batman movies. Let's just throw it out there generally. Or the original Supermans. Other than those exemptions, the DC universe has been a colossal failure, in my opinion. And I know people I did a whole YouTube video about this. I don't care if it made money. I'm not a fan. There's elements of it that I do enjoy. I'm a comic book guy like everybody else, but there's been a lot of failures there. And look, and I'm not the only one to say this. Everyone has said it. Even Warner Brothers is like, okay, we just can't. Wonder Woman I enjoyed Wonder Woman very much. And I thought Aquaman was fun. Probably one of the more fun ones. I think they could have let Jason Momoa loose a little bit more, but they kind of held him back, but that's just me. We're geeking out, guys, but we are going to get to story in a second.
Yes.
I want, in your opinion, what is the difference and why the DC universe's way of cinematic universe has failed so epically. Because Suicide Squad, just atrocious. But arguably one of the greatest trailers I've seen in the last 20 years. Without question. How they've been able to fail so epically with arguably 3 at least of the most iconic superheroes ever created, Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman. And yet Marvel, who's lost most of their A-level guys and girls through bad business dealings back in the day. They lost Spider-Man and X-Men and all these other properties. And they came in with, and please, everyone, just calm down before I say it. They came in with B-level characters, as far as Iron Man, Thor. I mean, I've been a Marvel guy all my life. Those are not A-level characters. They're not like, they weren't selling off like Fantastic Four, well, not Fantastic Four, but Thor, Iron Man, Captain America. These characters were not huge characters. They were popular and stuff, but they were not best. So they were able to bring that, and they've done this insane run of 11 years now, and created this insane Marvel universe that now, as we just recorded this, Endgame came out a couple weeks ago and is now broken. They're the second highest rate, the second biggest movie of all time, and it will become the biggest movie of all time because it got to that point in less than 2 weeks. There's a reason why people are so attached, and it's not just visual effects, it's not just spectacle. There's something so deep in story. Please, in your opinion, what made Marvel work as opposed to DC? And then I'll give you my humble opinion as well.
Okay. Well, as you mentioned, this is definitely riddled with landmines, and so I'm going to do my best here to not step on one.
A lot of hate mail is a lot of hate email is coming. I can see it already.
Right. I think there's a couple of things. One, I do think the point that you make about Marvel really built their recent success on characters that were not their A-list characters. I think that has a great deal to do with it, actually, because expectations for Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, the expectations for those characters, the backstory, the mythology behind those characters is so ingrained in the audience's mind. We have such a strong psychological idea of what those characters do and what types of stories they can be involved in. It makes it like walking a tightrope trying to tell, especially stories on the big screen about those characters. I think we've seen, the Batman universe and the Superman universe work really well, actually, in the television market. Smallville, I thought, was a really good show.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. But with Marvel, you have basically the people who went in to see these Marvel films, for the most part, didn't have a lot of expectations, didn't have a lot of backstory or knowledge about how Iron Man became Iron Man, about anything more than the Hulk. Maybe used to be a scientist. Maybe they knew that, maybe they didn't. But for the most part, Marvel was able to build their current mythology around these characters from the ground up in the mind of the audiences. And I think that was a lot easier task to pull off than what DC faced. Also, the nature of DC characters versus Marvel characters from a storytelling perspective is challenging, because basically with DC characters, and this is not all of them, but for the most part, DC characters are born with the gift, right? They're born with the supernatural power. Superman, he's born with it. Wonder Woman, she's born with it. Green Lantern, born with it. Marvel characters, for the most part, receive the gift through some sort of mistaken technology. They usually, are regular people that are endowed with this gift, and it usually involves some sort of diabolical thing that happens with technology. I think that idea of our technology being something that damages us, that we have to then overcome, is something that really resonates with people psychologically in this day and age. We recognize that we're giving up something by giving away all our privacy and giving away all our time to our cell phones. these are things that we know we have great advantages for, but we also know we're giving up something, but we'd like to think we're still going to win in the end. And so I think the Marvel mythology really speaks to that and plays to that. That's just one guy's humble opinion. Please don't at me on Twitter about this. But that's one guy's opinion of why I think we may have seen a lot more success, at least in the cinematic universe, with Marvel.
Now, would you agree that, and this has been my theory about this, and we won't go on this for another hour, I promise. But I've always felt that DC's characters are all essentially gods. Mm-hmm. You know, they're all god-like in their own way. So Green Lantern is essentially a god in his powers. So is Wonder Woman. So is Superman. So is Martian Manhunter. You know, other than Batman, who I've always argued to state that is a Marvel character in the DC universe, because he was a normal guy that got endowed by the technology and had to deal with his stuff. You know, as Thor is a god, but a very non-god-like God. Like, he has weaknesses. These other ones, they're just so hard to write for. Like, I remember watching a documentary on Superman, and they were like, yeah, we get to a point with Superman blew out a star with his breath. Like, where do you go from that? You know, like, there's nothing, like, on a just narrative standpoint, where's the conflict? It's harder to write for those characters. Would you agree?
I would completely agree. It's tough when we're dealing with gods. This is why, by the way, in mythology, when the Greek gods, were created by the Greeks to tell, they told stories about them, they are all really imperfect gods. That's the reason their stories that have endured forever is actually they're projections of human beings on different aspects of who we are. Mm-hmm. The Greek gods are more like human beings than the humans in the Greek mythological stories. And so I think that's one reason I think also people have gravitated towards Marvel in this day and age with the films has been Iron Man seems more like a guy you'd like to go get a beer with than Superman or Batman. You know, they seem more like us, seem more relatable. They're not so much the projections of who we want to be on our best days like Batman and Superman. So,
that's interesting.
And that said, I love Batman and Superman. I actually prefer the DC characters more than the Marvel characters, but there's no denying the success that Marvel has had at the box office.
And I would agree with you. Like, I would not want to have a beer with Batman, but I would definitely want to have a beer with Tony Stark. Like, there's just no, Batman's going to be brooding about things. He's just an angry dude. But I'm a huge Batman fan. That's why I love what Nolan did with Batman, and Dark Knight's arguably the best superhero movie ever made, in my opinion. With Logan coming up probably real close second, in my opinion. I mean, they're just at a different playing field. I enjoy the Avengers. I enjoy all those, but there's something really deep in those other movies.
For sure.
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic, and I'm sure we could have a whole episode on Marvel DC. And one last thing before I can finish on the Marvel DC thing, I just have to.
Okay.
In your opinion as well, do you believe that DC? I felt like DC was trying to mimic or copy or catch up with this kind of false race that they were with Marvel. Marvel had like a 5-year head start on them building this universe, and they're just trying to jam everything in, where if they would have taken their time and done literally they could have done the blueprint. They could have literally stolen the blueprint from Marvel and just built it out little by little, then do the Justice League, then bring in maybe Suicide Squad. Then it was laid out for them, but they were just in such a rush.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. And I think this is actually, just to loop it back into story, I think this is something that writers and storytellers really can learn a valuable lesson from, because many of us have a great idea for a story or a scene, and we're quick to sort of get that into our story, and then we get into like the second act or the third act, and we really sort of have our characters just sort of wandering around because we've done this big thing we wanted to do. And so I think there's always a temptation to um, to not appropriately pace our storytelling. And I think that's what we saw with DC on a great level. And I think you and I would both also agree as storytellers, pacing is hard to master. It's really difficult. In a story, pacing is one of the hardest things to do. And I think we even see, the big boys fail at this when, they try sometimes because it's hard to do.
Yeah, there's no question. And I always tell people too, is like, just because you have $200 million doesn't mean you know what you're doing. It's like going up to the bat. Like, just because you're Babe Ruth doesn't mean you're gonna hit a home run every time.
That's right.
It's just an expensive swing at the bat. It's a very expensive swing at the bat. So
this sort of actually, if you allow me one more divergence here, I think it's something that actually is a helpful thing for writers and storytellers to consider right now is, it is a big swing at the bat. Every time we devote ourselves to, writing 120 pages, for a story or writing, a TV pilot, I think because every swing of the bat is so expensive, one of the things I'm finding right now, I think that writers really can be doing as a favor to themselves is becoming as diverse as possible in their storytelling ecosystem. So I'm working on a book right now called The Creative Ecosystem. And here's sort of my idea. My life got so much simpler a few years ago when I stopped trying to narrow myself down to one single job description. When I would get on an airplane and people would ask me what I would do, it was tough because I'd say, well, I'm a writer, I write books and I write screenplays, but I also am a teacher and I'm also a speaker. And sometimes I go and I do story consulting for studios. And, it was tough to describe. And Alex, when I finally got to a point where I stopped trying to narrow my job description down to a single title and embrace my work as this ecosystem built around story, my life got a lot simpler. So some days I get up and I'm in the mountains of screenwriting and I have highs and lows and it's wonderful. Some days I'm in the deserts of speaking and I'm out in front of people and it's tough and it's dry and my throat needs water. And some days I'm in the swamps of story consulting and it's mushy and it's messy. And I've found out, just like a real ecosystem, I, as a creative person, have to constantly have new rivers and streams coming into the ecosystem. I also have to have things going out of the ecosystem, waste going out. That story that I keep coming back to, that I just keep wanting to tell. Sometimes you got to just let that script go and let that be waste that goes out of the ecosystem. And so I'm working on this book right now that is meant to encourage writers living in the gig economy, where a lot of us are driving Uber or driving Lyft or doing DoorDash. And we have 7 different things we're doing in order to make ends meet and make a living. And writing may just be one of those things. But managing your life and managing your creative work is an ecosystem, just like we have here on the planet, bringing new streams in, bringing things out, having forests that I go and I meditate in and I sort of just stay in my research place. Having a beach on your ecosystem that is just where you go for fun and you don't got to worry about, work at all. But having all those things as part of your creative ecosystem, I feel like is one of the most significant ways that writers can approach their creative life right now. And again, I think it's a lesson we're learning from big companies like Marvel and DC. They've had to expand their ecosystems. If DC were only trying to tell stories through movies right now, if they didn't have video games and comics, they'd be done. Well, we as writers need to take a lesson from that and need to say, okay, how can I develop my ecosystem where if my scripts aren't paying the bills right now, what are other areas that I can be writing in, that I can be doing in order to form a creative life that's meaningful?
That is fantastic. That is a fantastic idea for a book. It is. I've never heard it put that way before. So I am excited to read that book when it comes out, and I'm sure everyone listening is too, because it's so true. Like I have so many hyphenates, it's not even funny. Like I have so many hyphenates in my world. Like, what do you do? I'm like, well, I'm a blogger, I'm a podcaster, I'm a director, I'm a writer, I do post, I do this. It just keeps going on and on. So it's very difficult.
Yeah.
But I love the concept of coming in and going out. The going out for creatives is probably the toughest problem because you hold on to that script that you spent a year of your life on.
Yep.
But you really just need to take some X-Lax and just let it go. Just let it go. Loosen the bowels and let that go. Because it's not going there. It's just stopping you up. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be crass, but it's a great analogy because as creatives, I've done it in my life. I'm sure you have too. You hold on to something, but you're like, but I've spent so long on this movie or I've spent so long on this script and I got to hold on to it because if not, that year I just went through is a waste. Yeah. And I would argue that the year that you just went through is not a waste, even if the product might not make it. The education you got, the experience you got is invaluable, and you learn much more about yourself and about everything when you fail than when you win. You win. You learn nothing from the wins.
That's right.
Do you agree?
I completely agree, and that's why if you look at your work as an ecosystem, in order for the ecosystem as a whole to stay healthy, you need those outputs. You need to be disposing of the waste because that is what's going to keep the whole ecosystem healthy and to be able to say, you know what, that waste that I'm letting go of, it's there because there was work put in that strengthened some other part of the ecosystem. You know, right. So that when I'm in the forest just doing research and I'm just thinking through my story ideas and I'm working on outlines and working on, you know, that is not wasted time. We tend to think that, you know, it's only the time sitting in front of the computer at the keyboard, you know, that is actual writing. Man, most of my writing occurs when I'm in the car driving through the streets of LA. It occurs.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
I mean, that's when my writing happens. When I get to a keyboard, it's just a matter of getting to put it on the page. But the writing actually occurs when I'm out on the 405, you know, driving to the next thing I have to do. And learning to value that, learning to say, you know what, this is valuable time. And even if I have to let this go later, there's nutrients I've taken from this process that have made me a more healthy writer, and my entire ecosystem has been strengthened because of the work I did on this project. It's a much better way to live, man, than feeling like you're just failing all the time.
Yeah, and if you can, you know, like I'll use my career as an example. I started off as an editor, and then when editing work started to slow down, I jumped into color grading because I saw that there was less traffic there. Or less competition. So they started color grading. I'm like, well, wait a minute. Then I'll just also do post supervising because I essentially know how to do that anyway. And then I'm like, well, VFX supervising is just another step ahead of that. So I'll just do VFX supervising as well. And I'm also going to direct while I'm directing. So you're always finding something. So if I'm not working in one thing, I'm working in another. It's diversification of your creative process where it is so, it's like putting all your eggs, it's like when you're investing, you don't invest only on e-toys.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
You know, you don't only invest in Sears stock, you know, because things are not going to go well. You need to diversify your creative portfolio. And by doing multiple different things, I'm a screenwriter, I'm a writer, I'm a novelist, I'm a blogger, I write articles, I do this. You're constantly working and you're also constantly strengthening all of those muscles. Would you agree?
Man, Alex, you nailed it. You nailed it. That's exactly what, in my opinion, finding success in this business, that is the key. You know, it is about trying to diversify, to have a healthy ecosystem of work that is going on. That's really the key to success for me. And does that mean you're going to, you know, be hired to direct the next Marvel movie or whatever? Maybe that'll become part of your ecosystem and maybe it won't. But the thing is, if that's your only goal that you're trying to hit is I just want to be able to direct a Marvel movie, that's such a thin line and a thin goal line. You know, you're not setting yourself up for success, you know? So to me, that's sort of the beauty in people like yourself who are able to be these human Swiss Army knives, right? That it's like, hey, whatever you need done, I can step in and I can do it. I'm somebody who gets things done. In some ways, to me, Alex, that builds the sort of psychology that's necessary for success in the entertainment industry, is being somebody who embodies the Swiss Army knife and says, you know what, whatever they need done, I can do it and I can do it well. I'm going to step in and I'm going to learn that craft in order to bring some success to that. That's the psychology that's going to get you places in this industry.
Would you agree that the legacy way of doing things in this industry have been like the movie industry did not change for 80 to 100 years? It was pretty much, that was it. It did not move. I mean, from the technology of how movies were made, sure, little things here and there, but it was film and it went through the process, and writing, you were a screenwriter and that's it. So that focus of, I can only be a screenwriter as a writer in the business, that was it. In today's world, things are changing so dramatically that, and jobs are being just gone. Like, it's like, for lack of a better word, like I'm a coal miner and all of a sudden that's all I've done all my life. And all I know is coal mining. And guess what? The mine's closed now because whatever reasons, it's done.
Yeah.
And now they're like, well, I don't know how to do anything else. That is the old way of thinking, where in new economy, in the new entertainment industry, you need to be a jack of all trades. Specialization is you're risking when you do specialization, because in the world that we're living in, things are changing so rapidly that all of a sudden, like, oh, you know what? We don't need directors anymore. AI is taking care of that for us. But we also do need this. I don't think that's going to happen, but unless James Cameron creates it. But it happens all the time. And I saw it I came up, like I said, as an editor. When I came up, there weren't a lot of editors, and editing systems used to cost, $100,000, $150,000 to edit on nonlinear editing systems. Before that, it was $1 million to have an editing suite. And then all of a sudden, Final Cut came out, and now everyone's an editor. So now the competition came in. So then that's when I jumped into color grading, because color grading was still a little bit higher up and not everybody could do that. And then, but you kind of always jump all over the place.
Yeah.
If you don't do that, you're done.
That's it. And I mean, that's it. We would love to romanticize this idea, that we can just stay committed to this one thing. And I do think it's good to have something that is really your focus and a goal that you're trying to get to. I'm all for that. Not saying don't do that. But what I am saying is, if you want long-term success in this business, you've got to adapt that sort of adaptability. It's just like, the industry is changed. We don't think about the way that the industry has changed throughout history. For example, it used to be when you went to the movie theater, there was a man that was, or a woman that was paid to set up at an organ at the front and play music that accompanied what you were seeing on the screen.
Right.
And you know what? Overnight, that job disappeared.
Gone.
It was gone.
And if that's all you've done for 30 years, you're done.
That's right. You're done. And so often entire careers are gone overnight because that was, no longer needed. And that's the age we live in. I mean, think about, when you and I were young, if we wanted to go,
sir, I'm still young, sir. I don't know.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm speaking for myself, for sure.
I am 25. My daughters have done this to me.
Oh, you know what? I totally get it. I myself have been 29 for a number of years now.
Exactly. You were saying, sir.
Yes, but it used to be, if you or I wanted to go to Florida, we would call a travel agent and get them to book us a ticket to go to Florida.
Right.
That overnight, that entire industry disappeared, right? Because we didn't need it anymore. So if you want to be someone that, is putting all your eggs in one basket, you do risk this idea that, my career may be completely irrelevant overnight someday. But I think that's why those of us, I love that, your brand, your podcast, Indie Film Hustle, because I think most of us recognize that one of the big keys to success here is to have a hustle, to be hustlers. That's why I have a lot of friends that write all day, and then at 2 p.m, they go out and they drive Uber for 4 hours, and then they go do DoorDash for 4 hours. And the gig economy makes it a necessity that we have to be willing to be diverse in how we approach getting our art out into the world.
Without question. And every single time I walk into an Uber, I sit down in an Uber, the first words out of my mouth is, "How's the script?" And because I live in LA. So and about 7 out of 10 times I go, "How did you know?" I'm not making fun. I'm not, you know what? I'm just ribbing. But but it's the thing. And if it's not a screenwriter, it's an actor. And if it's not an actor, it's a director. If not a singer. I was in an Uber the other day. They played me their demo. Their demo was being played for me in their. I'm like, and they're like, "Can you give me options?" I'm like, opinions. I'm like, "Do you want the truth?" And because I'm never going to see you again. So if you want the truth, I'll tell you the truth. And I did. And you could see that they were just like, I'm like, you need more production. You need more this. This is like, all of a sudden I'm an American Idol judge. But this is the world that we live in right now. And it's tough. But I think that Swiss Army knife analogy is exactly what we all need to be, especially just on the writing standpoint. There is hundreds of different things you can do as writers. I know professional screenwriters who have jumped into novel writing because they keep 100% control of their story. And they don't have to deal with all the crap that goes along with trying to produce a feature film. And I want to touch on real quick virtual reality, because that is something that you wrote a book on that was very popular. Can you talk a little bit about the possibilities for writers in virtual reality and where that whole industry is going to go? Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you bring it up, because it really is a big part of my ecosystem right now. The new stream that's come in. And I've always sort of been interested in technology. I've been interested in cameras and post-production at various times. When virtual reality first started to rise into prominence this most recent time, I recognized that the language that we could tell stories with this medium was really going to be different than anything we had experienced before. Part of that is because for the last 120 years, we've been using the edges of a frame to tell an audience, here's what's important, here's what is not important. If it's outside the edges of the frame, don't worry about it. I will tell you as the storyteller what to pay attention to by centering it up somewhere near the center of the frame. I will show you what it is that I want you to see. With virtual reality, we've removed the edges of the frame, and we have put the audience in the role of the protagonist. But I would suggest to you that no technology has really taken off and succeeded on a mass level until we figured out how to tell a story with it. Film cameras, Thomas Edison, when he first developed the film camera, only used them for scientific purposes. He predicted the failure of using a film camera to tell stories with. Now, he was greatly wrong about that. But once we figured out how to tell stories with cameras, that technology takes off. Television takes off once we really figure out how to tell stories with it. Radio takes off when we figure out how to tell stories with it. Even, I would dare say, the internet really took off once we figured out how to share our stories with it. My mother has become a Facebook expert, and it's only because she wants to be able to share her stories and experience the stories of her grandchildren, right? So I am convinced that we haven't yet figured out how to tell good stories with virtual reality. It's sort of what the book that I wrote is about. But I'm convinced that the ability to give the audience agency within a story is something that's not going to go away. This is a whole different medium outside of video games, outside of film. And just like with those mediums, it took us time to develop a cinematic language. It's going to take some time with virtual reality to develop a cinematic language. This gives an opportunity for writers, however, to help craft this new storytelling medium in a way that's never been done before. There is a lot of money in tech that is being invested into trying to tell successful stories in virtual reality. So I would highly recommend that any writer who's looking to sort of expand their ecosystem start looking into VR as a medium to write for, because a lot of what you know about story will apply in this new medium, even as you figure out how to expand your storytelling abilities in a new cinematic language.
Would you agree with the statement that that box that you were talking about, that we've been trained and most humans have been trained to look at, even back in the Greek stage, like it was whatever was on the stage, basically.
Yes.
When when that box is now gone, is it a little overwhelming? Because I feel it's extremely overwhelming when I sit down with VR and I'm just like, oh my, it's just too much input. And I'm like, where do I go? It's like I'm not trained for it. And even, I mean, maybe the generation coming up, because they play video games in a kind of VR world where everything is all over the place. But at least for our generation and generations before, but even then, that's video game playing. That's not storytelling. Storytelling is still, storytelling needs a storyteller. And that storyteller is the one who's going to tell you the story. When it's so wide open, there is no, back to the very beginning of this conversation, there is no structure. It doesn't seem like it. Do you agree? Tell me, what do you think?
Well, I think it's more nuanced than that. And here's why. If you look back to the history of film, when film first began to be displayed in these big motion picture houses, there's a very famous old film clip of a cowboy pointing a gun directly at the screen and pulling the trigger. And it's a very famous story. Audiences jumping up and running out of the theaters because they felt exactly the way that you feel about virtual reality. They felt like, it's too overwhelming. It's too much information. It's too real.
It was like when the train was coming in for the first time, people thought the train was going to run them over. Right.
Exactly. So in some sense, it is because we're an audience. You and I have grown up with this 2D medium, that we're not allowed much agency in. And so for us, it does feel overwhelming. However, I think as younger audiences that have been immersed in the sort of video game storytelling that a lot of older people find very overwhelming, I think it's something that younger audiences are going to grow into. However, let me say this as well. I think this is back where my narrative shards idea comes into play, that you don't necessarily have to have a 3-act structure in a VR experience. You may use elements that we know about character, or elements that we know about symbolism, or elements that we know about environmental storytelling in order to communicate a story where the audience is the protagonist. So again, do I think we've got it all figured out? No. But I think it also took us some time to figure out how to do it with cinema. We didn't get that right for a number of years. And think about how long it took the earliest, Moy Bridges' horse of running before we got to the point where we have, Marvel Endgame. I mean, that is a long, long way to go with storytelling. So I think we've got a long way to go, but I'm confident once we get rid of those big block headsets that people have to put on their heads, we probably won't even call it virtual reality anymore. But I think people are interested in being immersed in a story in ways that they never have been before. So I think it's clunky. I think we're not quite there with it. But the writers who figure out how to tell an immersive story now, in the same ways that immersive theater, theme parks, escape rooms have been succeeding with for a number of years, I think those storytellers will be at the forefront of this future of storytelling that we're just figuring out how to. We're babies. We're just figuring out how to stand right now. But one day we'll grow into it. We'll be able to walk. We'll be able to run. And we'll be able to really experience something like we've never experienced before, I believe.
So it's going to get better than Lawnmower Man, is what you're telling me? It's going to get a little bit better than that?
Nothing gets better than Lawnmower Man. That movie is a classic, man. It's a classic. I love it.
I was in the video store working when that came out, and when that came out, your mind was like, what is this visual effects? Oh my God. Like it just...
So good.
Like Jeff Fahey, Pierce Brosnan, what's going on? Sorry. So I want to ask you a few questions I ask all of my guests. What advice would you
Yes.
give a screenwriter or storyteller trying to break into the business today?
I would say that it's important you recognize that this game is a marathon and not a sprint. You've really got to be in for the long haul. And when you finally get your opportunity, and I feel like Hollywood in the entertainment business is this super long line of people, and you wait your turn to get up to the front of the line. And if you've done all your work to perfect your craft, by the time you get up to the front of the line and get your shot, I really believe you'll make it. However, if you've wasted that time, and you didn't perfect your craft by the time you get up to the front of the line and get your shot, then yeah, you probably won't make it. So I think approaching everything you do as being preparation for when you get your big shot, I think is very important. And the final thing I'll say on that is this, Alex. Every other art form, artists are very comfortable with practicing their art form. So people that are learning to draw or paint, they practice, they sketch. Musicians, they practice, right? For whatever reason, filmmakers and storytellers feel like every little thing we ever do needs to be put up on YouTube for public consumption. It needs to have a grand premiere. We need to have a big party around it. And we're sort of immature in that way. I look at the vast majority of the writing and the films that I've done as being practice for something that I do want to share with the public. So I would say prepare to mature yourself to a place where you don't need to take every single piece of work you do and put it up for public consumption as a celebration of your art, but practice and use your art form to practice in a way that when you really do have something you want to share, it is strategically put in front of an audience instead of just taking every little thing you crap out and put it on YouTube or Vimeo for everybody to see. So that's the biggest advice I could give storytellers right now.
Some of the best screenwriters I know, I always ask the question, like, how many scripts did you write before you sold one? And a lot of times it's 8, 10, 15, 20, because that's a professional.
Yeah, that's right.
A professional will do that. And then the professional will not write and spend 5 years on one screenplay. That's just not what a professional will do.
That's right.
You have to you got to work. You got to, I think it was the legend Ed Sheridan, who said this. And I thought it was a wonderful analogy when he starts writing, because they asked him, how do you write songs? He's an amazing songwriter. And they go, how do you, when you write something? Because, it's kind of like you walk into an old house and you go into the bathroom and you turn on the tub and you open up the faucet in the tub and all you get is sludge. Yeah. And you just get all that sludge has to come out and come out and come out till eventually it starts clearing up. And then you get crystal clear water, but you've got to go through the sludge.
That's it, man. You got to get all the bad writing out before any good writing is going to come through.
Amen. Now, can you tell me the book that had the biggest impact on your life or career?
Yeah, I would definitely say it's Joseph Campbell, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. But let me also recommend one other book that's a little more modern, and it's a book of fiction for writers and storytellers. This I think is just a really great example of really simple but powerful storytelling. Mm-hmm. It's a book by a guy named David Schickler, and it's called Kissing in Manhattan. And it's a collection of short stories, an anthology that all the short stories end up weaving together. David Schickler, probably most known, he sold an idea to Cinemax for a series called Banshee. And I thought Banshee was a great series, but David Schickler created and wrote that. But he had a book of short stories called Kissing in Manhattan. And I always love to recommend that to writers and storytellers as just an example of really creative but simple characters in stories that really are powerful.
Now, what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film business or in life?
Wow. I feel like I could do a whole nother podcast just talking about the lessons that I've learned. But I think the biggest lesson that I've learned is this. trying to chase what I think is popular or what other people like as far as stories go. That is the dog chasing its tail, and I've really learned the weird little things that I nerd out about and geek out about. Those passions are the things that I should be telling stories about, and those are the things that bring the juice of life to me. Mm-hmm. And I've learned to really not be ashamed of the weird little things I'm interested in and that I spend a lot of time in. So I'll give you a brief example. I am really fascinated by this place called Hubert's Dime Museum. And it was the last dime museum in the United States. It closed down in 1969. It was in Times Square in New York. And it was this really just weird place. And I have read everything I could possibly read about it. And I have found every picture. I go on eBay all the time and buy things that were held there in the museum. And what does that have to do with my work? Nothing. But it's something that I can geek out about and that I can get deep into and that nobody else in the world likes but me. But it brings so much joy to me to have that and to not be ashamed of that or not feel like, that that's a waste of my time. Mm-hmm. So find those little things in life that bring you the most juice and that bring you the most meaning and the most joy, and make time for those things in your life, because the rest of this stuff is great, but it comes and goes, and you need those little things that are just yours.
Now, what fear did you have to break through to get to where you are today?
I think, again, I could do a whole nother podcast of all the fears that I've had, but the two biggest fears that I've had are, one, imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. I still to this day, and I've published 5 books on storytelling, and every time I get up on a podcast or get on a stage or submit a script, I still have this idea in the back of my head that it's like, today's the day they're going to figure you out, that you don't know what you're doing. Today's that day.
You and me both, brother.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, it's like that imposter syndrome. I don't care how much success you have. And I've sat down with some of the biggest names in the business, and they've told me they still have that. So I don't think it ever goes away. But that, and then the fear of what will other people think? Will other people think I'm not good? Will other people think I'm stupid or that my ideas are dumb? Those are the two big fears for me, is that imposter syndrome, and then the fear of that everybody else knows what good is except for me.
Yeah, that's definitely two big ones you got to come across, and you've done very well. You don't show it, sir. You don't show it.
I try. I struggle with them all the time, but those are the fears I would say that I'm learning to battle and learning to overcome.
Now, what are 3 of your favorite films of all time?
Yeah, man, that's an easy one, because I've thought long and hard about this on many occasions. Okay. Number 3 for me is Raiders of the Lost Ark. Jeez. I will forever be a result of that film. It inspired much of my interest in mythology that I went to pursue a PhD around. Just last night, I watched Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I just love going into that world, man. Oh. It is a big number 3 for me. Number 2 is The Empire Strikes Back. That film showed me that a dark story still could be full of hope and could be a story that stories can stay with you for life. Mm-hmm. That story has just never left me. And then number 1 is probably a lesser known film that a lot of people may not have seen. It's an old Orson Welles film called The Third Man. Mm-hmm. And The Third Man it's one of my favorite films. It's a dark noir film, and it's about a man that fakes his own death, and the person who discovers this and tracks him down. And there's just something about that film that I can't fully articulate or put into words that really speaks to me. And I love going back to watch The Third Man every chance I get.
Awesome. Now, where can people find you and more about your work?
Yeah, the two big places. One, please visit my website. It's tellingabetterstory.com. You can see a lot of my work there, read more about me, get to all my social media channels. The other place I'm really active is on Twitter, and it's at John, John Kbucher. So it's my name with my middle initial. And I'm really active on Twitter and really enjoy connecting with people there. So look forward to seeing people on Twitter or really any of the social media handles that you can find at my website, tellingabetterstory.com.
John, man, it has been an absolute pleasure. I know we can sit here and talk for at least another hour or two without question about just on the Avengers and DC alone. But it's been an absolute honor having you and a pleasure speaking to you on the show. And you've dropped some amazing knowledge bombs on the tribe today. So I do truly appreciate it, brother. Thank you so much.
Thanks.